sustainability of the business address exclusively a restricted group to which I'm addressing when I speak about financial sustainability. I can't only talk to shareholders. I have also to address what I call the stakeholders. If we think globally, yes, Elliot, do you have something to say? Thank you so much for giving me this opportunity. Sustainability doesn't require also an analysis of the role of the organization, its influence in the community. For example, a port, talking about the operational aspect. This worry about the port sustainability doesn't integrate its interland. Isn't it so ambitious that it overcomes the physical frontiers of the port? How do we see it? We see it on the stakeholders' point of view, and who is the stakeholder? It's the state. What are we going to measure? Are we going to measure the price of the port rate or the added value that we are putting to the goods, to the merchandise? These questions are part of your reflection? The first question that is part of my reflection, of course, is the name, Maria Vieira. I think that we don't need such a formal treatment. In terms of answering your question, what I'm proposing here is the vision of sustainability of an organization, of an activity that has to leave the niche of the stakeholder and enter of the shareholder, and enter the global part, the global field of the stakeholders. Not only in the economic activity, that's what you referred to, but also in parts that are directly or indirectly affected by the activity of our organization or our area. Maritime transport can be promoted, can be promoting or depromoting. We can see it as a ship with a color that is confounded with the ocean and transport toys, or the same ship seen from a different perspective, having a great black smoke coming out of its chimneys. So both situations define or characterize the relationship of maritime transport with the society. This is the global field that interests in terms of economic sustainability of maritime transport. I don't know if I answered your question or if you need any more information. How do we characterize maritime transport as a business? We're not going to approach here all the economic activities that gravitate around maritime transport that are, which are many. The port is an example. It's an indispensable condition for the existence of maritime transport. But here we're going to approach the maritime transport from the point of view of the ship, of the life cycle since its building to its final phase, the scrapping, the shipbreaking, or the proposal that I bring here, that is the recycling, or the proposal that I would like us to build altogether to adopt this fourth pilot. First business that is associated with any ship is the freight market. What is the freight? It can be seen in two ways. First of all, the good approach, merchandise approach. But here we're going to speak about the ship approach. In this aspect, the freight is the value that is paid to the owner of the ship for using it. This is the main business that is associated with the ship. Most of the maritime transport operators have currently a proper fleet that is inferior to the fleet that is necessary to operate their own business. The dimensions of the fleet are inferior and necessary to operate the business, and that's why they often use chartered ships. So the property and the use of the shipment of the ship are two distinct operations. One of them is the ship operation, and the other is the management of the ship itself. Where are these parts in the freight business? The freight or the freight derivatives that we're going to talk about a little bit later. I think that the derivative markets don't only exist related to the freight, but mostly all financial goods, and especially when it comes to CFDs, the contracts for difference. It's a way to limit the risk of the business. The freight is the main business. The construction of new ships, it's nowadays a very important business within maritime transport. The buying and selling market, not of new ships, but of second-hand ships. And finally, the shipbreaking market or the recycling market. These are the four big businesses associated to the exploration of the ship, each with its specificities, each with its market aspects, and all included in this global aspect of sustainability. Not one of these businesses can be made without a multidisciplinary approach in terms of sustainability. The aspect that I referred earlier of most operators not having their own fleet but having a mix of owned and chartered ships, what does this allow in terms of business? It allows more flexibility. We all heard recently about a kind of financial operation that is the sale and leaseback. We heard it regarding the business of TAP, which consists in selling and renting back, which is applied nowadays to many areas of activities, not only with ships, but also with planes, and especially in the real estate world. It's a concept that is present in many areas, this idea of selling for renting back, especially in a business as maritime transport that has great needs. I hope that you would mention this aspect earlier. That is the cash flow. It's a business that, in terms of structures, has a great need and has to be constantly lubrified because it's a general need of this kind of business. How can we mitigate this need? We have to stop being capitalist, and that's why we sell and then rent again. Most of the global companies, in terms of containers operation only here, have a own fleet component and a charter ship component. In the case of MSC, for example, the charter ship is much superior to the own ship. We're here going to make a separation in the business between regular ships that operate in a spot market, because in the case of container fleet, there's a great concentration in terms of economical activity. We have approximately 12 companies that monopolize globally almost all the economic activity, which is not what happens in the bulk business, where there is a more fragmented structure in terms of property and management of ships. In the bulk market, we still see it in terms of containers market less, but in the bulk market, we assist to a great family business system that is very similar to what we know here in terms of rodoviary transport. We know people who have one or two trucks who put them in the freight market. In terms of bulk transport, there are still these family companies, especially in the north of Europe, who have global companies who own ships, build them, and then put them in the freight market. The owner in the maritime transport business is at the summit of all the sustainability networks of the business. The most vast, the larger network that starts with the final consumer. Then we move on to the charter. It's the person who buys, who sells all the goods, the person who has merchandise to transport. The shipper is the following network in terms of economic sustainability in maritime transport. And at the top, we have the owner. We mentioned earlier that maritime transport is an industry that needs a lubrification of cash flow that should be continuous. I have here a little diagram, one of the most common flow diagram in terms of maritime transport. In gold, you have the exit, and in red, the entrance. The main entrances should be the freight and derivatives. The purchase and sale of used ships. And finally, the shipbreaking. As you can see, it doesn't add any value to the fleet. It's neutral in terms of capacity. At the end, the flood is unaltered. It's unaltered in terms of capacity in terms of volume that the fleet may transport, but the fleet does uh, gain in terms of agility. It might be transferred when there are property transfers. The ships go from one route to another, one that might have a greater need, this transportation, uh, purchased from others that do not need it so much right now. As we can see here, this system doesn't guarantee everything. There's an important component here that is missing, and that would be the sum of all these golden arrows subtracted by the red arrows has to be compensated by financing. This financing can have two origins. The most common one the most common financing source that we have. Here we can go back to speaking about the generational question when we speak about sustainability, and we said that it was the ability to satisfy the current needs without compromising the ability of the next generation to take care of their own needs. To coming back to this generational way of thinking, in my time, my main financing source was my father. For the economic activity, we need a little bit more complex financing sources. Bank. I'm sorry, I cannot translate what is being said in the room. The most common scheme in terms of customers in the community itself. One that is being used now to buy football players, obligation loans, and another one that you referred, IPOs, initial public offering, actions that are emitted in the name of the main stakeholder. It's one of the measures of the dynamic market. There are several companies to use these IPOs frequently. These are the three main financing sources that complement that little failure, so to say, that exists in these cycles, in these diagram of cash flow circulation when it comes to maritime transport. New ships that are generally what requires more investment in terms of capital that is compensated by the value of the freight and the value that we get from shipbreaking. And there's a fourth financing source. That would be the FFA, the Forward Freight Agreement. How does this freight market work? We're going to speak a little more in detail about this freight market, and we're going to look at some nautical terms to do so, to see how this market works. This freight market works according to the type of ship. The ships are characterized in terms of dimensions and also in terms of typology, depending on the area.
In terms of dimension, the most common one, length, draught, called width in common language, breadth, which has to do with submerged area. And these are definitions that are more related with the nautic sector, which is the displacement. That are measured in tons and that have nothing to do with weight. It's a volume measure. Volume of what? If it's volume, it's what's closed. It's the volume of all the closed rooms of the ship. And the dead weight, Commandant Elio. Dead weight? Well, that's exactly it. How can this be expressed in tons? The gross tonnage have to do with semantics in translation. It's not tons in weight, but it's tons of recipients. It has 2.8 metric cubic meters. Well, it's expressed in tons, but it has nothing to do with weight. This is sometimes when passenger ships come into Lithuania with 120,000 tons in weight. This has nothing to do with weight. It has to do with volume. And this has some influence with the relation with maritime transport. This has influence with the rates of gross registered tonnage. All these excesses have to do with the gross register. We will see when we speak about jurisdiction of the environmental sustainability of maritime transport It has a decisive dimension on the entrance, enforce, and the approval of international conventions regarding the environment. All of them regulate, and to be enforced, it's not enough that they have a number of parts or hiring countries that are stipulated. They demand also that those hiring countries have registered in their flag a gross tonnage corresponding to a great percentage regarding the available one available worldwide. Usually higher than 30% in some cases in conventions with that demand measures that are more serious or more costly. They demand 40% of the gross tonnage in order that the convention can be enforced. An important measure for the ship because what the ship has, um, the relation that has with the ship owner has to do with the gross tonnage of the ship. The carrying capacity has to do with weight. This has to do with tons. It measures exactly the capacity of cargo of the ship regarding weight. It has an acronym of GT. It has nothing to do with cars, with the length, the draft, the breadth, the air draft. This is a reference. In the contracts that we have, the carrying capacity is DW, deadweight. These are the dimensions of the ships that are important for the contracts and for the quota of the price of the freight on the international market. The types. Four basic types, just to state two or three more different typologies that are now appearing but that are not relevant for the approach that we will have regarding the economic sustainability of maritime transport. Handysize, Supramax, Panamax, all of us know about this, and Capesize. These four different typologies are then the ones that constitute a package used for the quotation of the value of the freight on the international markets, which is the Baltic Dry Index, BDI. Let's keep these typologies handysize. It's a ship with a deadweight inferior to 30,000 tons. Capesize, as you can see by the name, the ship that has a typical route by a cape. The two ones that are of reference, Cape of Boa Esperança, and the other of the American continent, Horn Cape. So Cape size are ships which the dimension don't allow them to go on the artificial canals in Panama and in the Suez Canal also. Their dimensions are above the ones that are admitted by those canals, and they are forced to use their own route through the Horn or the Good Hope Cape. Panamax, as we all know, is a reference that will have some changes brief on the short term. And now trying to our own horn, we have our own reference, which is Douro Max. Not Leixões, but we have Douro Max. There is Volga Max also. Even our sites made a series of ships to go on the Volga River. We have Douro Max also. It's the maximum dimensions allowed by those water dams. Regarding Panamax, they are the maximum dimensions allowed by the floodgate. Panama is limited by the drought, and the Suez Canal has to do with the transversal section with that area. This means trying to make it simple. If it's wider, we need to have less drought, and to have less drought, we need to have less gob. On the Panama Canal, it's a purely artificial canal with a more intensive technology than to the Suez Canal, and it doesn't have the same capacity of adaptation. They are building a new canal, while Suez has to do frequently adaptation works with the needs of traffic. Participating in this business of maritime transport, or in the four businesses of maritime transport. In the freight business, we see always two participants: the ship owner, the other is the freight agent, the one who uses the ship through the payment of the freight to make its commercial exploration. In the business of new constructions, there is a site for building and the ship owner. For scrapping, there is a scrapping site and the ship owner. And including all these businesses, it's the omnipresent broker. Using the definition of broker itself is someone that within the business never gets the bigger size of the deal. It just has some crumbs because he has a lot of businesses, so he builds a pyramid of crumbs. That's the goal of the broker, and this is transversal to all business. Of course, this attributes some dynamics and an execution quite fast that would not be possible any other way. Without the broker, it would not be possible to have the for-life contract. And the insurance or the possibility of the ship owner to have quick financing without the broker It could be practically impossible the business of recycling sales. As we will see when we reach the environment part, the business of selling for recycling are quite delicate. They depend on what we are trying to sell, if we are selling a ship, for example, or if we are selling waste. One situation and the other has a completely different way of treating. So the importance of the broker to make this transformation of the ship in waste. This transformation has nothing to do with the physical one, to do with the legal one regarding the law, because in terms of legislation that will be given to the same object, the physical object is completely different. Construction shipyard, shipbreaking site, and we need to typify the type of agreements that the ship is abided by, right by travel, by time, and in the ship. These three types of contract has nothing to do, or it is not dependent, of course, of its length, only, of course, that the agreement by trip is inferior to the one that's driven by time, and the time one in terms of concept has a lower duration of the one made in common hull, but that's not the difference between the different types of contracts. The responsibility of the operation relies, and it varies despite the type of contract. The ones who are exploring the ship need to make a management of the variable costs. It has the crew on it, and it will have also the costs regarding the exploration of the ship. Regarding the freight, the time charter, the cost does not include the crew. Regarding selection and management of crew, has to do with the ship owner itself. The time charter is exactly that. It's a contract made by shorter time for a specific trip used by ship owners that have a cargo that in that specific time need uh, a ship, and they can comply with the totality of cargo space of the ship, but all the management of the ship is of the responsibility of the ship owner himself. We've seen the Suez Canal has had these developments throughout time. It's a canal that allows crossing of ships. And the Panama Canal is being uh, is being made wider now for traffic of containers. Allows at 4,000 TEUs for ships with 12,000 TEUs. The Panama Canal can have the direct competition of another canal, which is the Nicaragua Canal also. It's still with the environmental impact study. I think it was presented already. It will be assessed. They are forming, they are training people to build it. They just need financing. It's not ready. Freight market. This economical scope of the business, maritime transport, is regulated on the market. It's a regulated market. The contracts, the freight agreements, the forward agreements are made on the regulated market. Just to give you a little comparison with all the agreements that exist in the market with other financial instruments, the sole financial instruments that are working, that are transacted on the regulated market are stocks. All the others are regulated. The freight market is transacted on the regulated market. And the indexes of the Baltic Dry indexes as a daily index where we have a set of these different types of ships. Supramax, Panamax, Capesize and Handysize. These are the four types of ships that go within the Baltic Dry index. There are also indexes, because we are speaking about the dry index. We need to address the wet index, not exactly, of course, but an index where we can see the freight of the liquid cargo ships, dries for solid cargoes. And then we have a market where we have an index of the freight of the ships who have liquid cargoes. Where are these two indexes? The Baltic Clean Tanker Index and the Baltic Dirty Tanker Index. The clean and dirty should not be seen exactly like the name shows. Dirty is for ships or for products, or raw oil, or waste, or fuels that are derivative of waste like fuel, and clean is for refined products. These are the two indexes that are useful to give us a perspective of the value of the freight, of the market freight at each moment. These are values that are extreme volatile. The higher value, if you see of the index of the dry cargo, it's from May '08, almost 12,000 points. After 7 months, less than 700 points. Translating this, it shows you the difficulty of the ship owner of managing those financial flows that we've seen in the initial scheme. The greater part of the entries of the main financial flow was a freight. So please note how you can go from a 12,000 value of freight to a value of 600. The scrapping business depends on three main factors: the supply and demand relationship for a certain segment, but mostly it depends something called legislation and regulation. If you see the peak regarding scrapping or new buildings have to do with regulation. Tank ships, what's the peak of scrapping? First step, first Great Wave '07, second Great Wave '15. Here, the stage extension of deadweight ships. Here, the stage extension of the remaining type ships. This shows peaks in terms of the recycling activity, peaks in terms of new buildings just to replace the previous ones, or the reflexes of what we've seen before, coming from 12,000 to 600. The implications here are only regarding one of the businesses. This has only to do with scrapping. No new buildings here. It's difficult to manage such a volatile business regarding prices. It lacks here an important element, which is predictability. In a business where most of the costs are sale. Either if the ship is in the port or is operating, I have costs that I cannot escape. Most of the costs and of the cost structure of the ships, about 80% are fixed costs. I gave you two time series of 10 years for tank ships, above to give you a sailor language of black product transports, and below for white product. And on the left, we have a chart with the evolution of PDI on the dry cargo transports. Just a question, this indicator, what is used? Was it good for, it's a maritime transportation index, but in practice, what do we use it for? Well, this indicator is not, it's not a guide. This is a result of business that are concluded successfully, agreements that are signed for freight. The value of those agreements is translated into this set where we have different types, four types of ships we mentioned, according with the shareholder indexes are not a reference or a guide. These are results of the indexes that went to the market that day. The BDI and the indexes for the transports of liquid cargo are built exactly the same way, with the value on which the businesses were made that same day. Okay, but all that information is used by someone to make a decision. Is that it? That's what I'm trying to understand, because we are building an indicator. And what's the goal of the indicator? Is just to measure business? not to make a decision? Well, this index is built according to the same way as the shareholder indexes. Well, a lot of decisions are made based on the shareholder indexes. The main one is this one of the edging of the freight agreements to limit the risks of the freight agreements. When I conclude a freight agreement, when I sell, when I have a CFD of a freight contract, imagine that the value of the BDI is of 700 today. This means that a ship and this size is being placed on the market by $3,000 or $4,000 a day. The indexes, like the shareholding ones, people who work on them, they explore trends. If you were to see in all the negotiation tools that we have available to us, more than the data that we have at our availability a series of mathematics tools to work trends. The great goal, the indexes, what they gave us is to work on trends, and to work on trends allows us to make these long-term agreements. Long-term agreements, the forward freight agreements, is to sell to someone my ship for the next 2 years. I predict that the value of the freight will drop 10%. 10% probably it's not a serious estimate given the volatility, but I don't know, 50% the next 2 years. I can sell the sub-product with a drop of only 25. What happens at the end of the agreement, and that's why we call it the agreement by difference. I can imagine that the price at this time of the freight of an size are $4,000 a day. I sell foreign freight agreement by $3,500 a day for 2 years. Or maybe just one agreement. When I get to the end of the contract or to the execution date of the agreement, the value of the freight is higher, and the ones who brought me will profit, or it is lower, and I have the profit in that difference that I wouldn't if I would sell the agreement at the same day. Obviously, like all insurance, these agreements have a quite high price, but it allows us to explore trends with a lot of algorithms of math models. The most common ones today are the clouds of Mr. Ishimoku, but there are a lot of models on the charts to explore trends, trying to predict the evolution of the business on the long term. But the index is built with real values, and it is within those values that we conclude an agreement. It's useful, obviously, for those who at that day want to conclude an agreement as a freight agent or a ship owner to have a reference, to have an indication. But uh, this reflects what is being made in reality. Freight markets, the drivers, what can uh, send it forward or backwards? Anyone can tell me the time? What can send this market forward or backwards? Well, obviously, the supply and demand of maritime transport, the number of ships, the adjustments that are being made on the fleet, the orders that are being made for the shipyard, number of ships that are to be dismantled, looking for raw materials also. We saw here that the main cause of the value of BDI had that huge drop has to do with this second item, the demand for raw materials sent forward the BDI for that extraordinary value seen before the economic crisis of 0708, and that was the cause of the drop in demand, or what brought the BDI for that lower value, where it still is located today. These seasonal variations that you see on these charts, all of them have peaked closer to the end of the year. If we see the stats of the Leixões port, we have peaks also close to the end of the year. Well, the market also oscillates regarding the bunker prices, the fuel prices. In one sense or the other, the value of the price sometimes is choke point. What are choke points anyway? These are disturbances of a geopolitical nature in very sensible points and narrow, where the maritime transport goes through. Iran says that it will have army movements in the Hormuz Strait. There is a peak in the transport of liquid cargo. The piracy at SAG, for example, in Malak, a peak in the indexes of solid cargo. Disturbances of geopolitical character are one of the factors that are influencing the most the behavior of the indexes, and not only the indexes regarding maritime transport. If you see, shareholding indexes and other sub-product indexes have the same behavior. The volatility increases a lot with the disturbances of geopolitical scope and the feeling of the market sentiment, the trust, call it trust. Today we have a lot of indexes that measure trust. If you were to see the ones that we know the most, the ones for market, consumer trust, producer trust, industrial trust, services, a lot of indexes that diagnose through survey that are measuring trust, the market sentiment. This can send backwards or forward the behavior of these indexes.
The maritime transport sustainability can also be viewed through these two indexes. What they have is a stake behavior. They started being made quite recently with a stake behavior of companies that are owner companies. We have here two indexes that are in time scale quite short, but they have very different behaviors. The index of container ship owners and the performance of bulk ship owners. While the index of bulk ship owners have known a decrease in the behavior of their index, the container ship owners have seen quite a positive development. There are other reasons for these behaviors. They're not only related to the market. At the very beginning, in terms of structure of the concentration of the ship ownership, we saw that in terms of container ship owners and bulk ship owners, we could see that container ship owners are reference companies. companies that have a brand that is recognized. If we ask us, we can all identify at least one company that is a participant in the global market in container ship market. Maersk, for example, and now one company that participates in the market of bulk transport. It's a structure that is much more fragmented. She's starting to look more unified, and when I spoke about the ship typologies, I didn't refer to the typologies of the index that are more recent ones, and that are the KIMAX, for the transport of natural gas, and the Catermax and the Shinermax that has another name. The Shinermax is one name and Valmax is another one. The Val company, that is a company who is currently working with bulk transport ships that are quite big, that can have up to 400 meters in terms of length, and it's the company that starts to have a name that is more recognized in the bulk market. After these great companies and great operators stop to have their own fleet, BP doesn't have its own fleet anymore, Shell doesn't either, other companies are in the same situation. All of this fruit of fusion processes, especially with some accidents that have been emerging. The most recent case being, for example, that we saw here in Portugal, that occurred a very little time ago. That was the case of Gulf, that through its partner, Sacor, had its own fleet with a series of ships. When I started working as an official of merchandise marine, Gulf still had quite a relevant fleet of ships, but right now it doesn't anymore. All the big names of oil companies have disappeared, while owner companies also started to emerge. The temporal scale of the graphics is of 1 year. The scale of the behavior of stakes is of 1 year. The behavior of the indexes was of 10 years. For us to have an idea of what the behavior is within a given period of time, that is the main reason why we do these FFA contracts now. Used ships market. What allows the buying and the selling allows us to adjust the characteristic of the fleet in terms of routes and in terms of capacity. These ships can be obsolete for us, but there are other participants in the market for which these ships still gather conditions for a good and rental exploration. It's all about the sale and leaseback, as we talked earlier, which is about selling and then releasing. Reasons for buying. It allows us to adjust the dimension of our fleet to adapt to a new market. It allows us sometimes at least to adjust our fleet in terms of other routes and other markets, and also to adjust our fleet regarding the market expectations. The number of transactions of used ships has been varying. It has known an increase in the last years. If we notice here in the years before the crisis, we had a great intensity in terms of business in the second-hand buying that grows increasingly starting from the 2007 crisis. And it has been growing again recently, which is a little bit worrying. Reasons for buying secondhand, we already saw them, especially to answer to market expectations. The markets where the ship typologies, where we have verified more business currently are mainly in terms of bulk ships of minor scale, in container ships, also in smaller ships. All of this corresponds to adjustments that are being made at a global level in the composition of the fleet. It's the reflection of what we have here in our very own port. We have been growing exponentially in terms of goods movement and merchandise movement, and we've been increasing in terms of ships that are in our port annually. And these ships that are being more transactions are these small ships. These are businesses that are less dangerous, and these are market segments in which we can transfer capacity from one route to the other. New ships market. All right, we recommend it. This is only seeing one of the sides of the business, that is the one of the new ships, because it's having a counterpart in a growing world of ships that are being scrapped in the fleet. Right now, the orders are being quite numerous. There are lots of owners at a global scale that are launching new orders in the shipyards. There are several markets, some of them losing a little activity and others having some dynamism. The large container ships, some of them with 20,000 cubes, and the ships that transport natural gas. These ships correspond to a growing demand, not only for economical reasons, but especially in terms of regulation. The K-MAX here are a very important part. Here we can have an idea of the adaptability that is being made in the container ship fleet. We can see here that we already have the new orders all gathered in the same diagram. The ships that are being sold to be dismantled. And this little curve here doesn't mean that the fleet is being a negative adjustment. It means that the growing rate is actually decreasing. This little continuous line represents a rate. It's not a measure, but it's a relation. And the value of this relation, this growth relation, the way the fleet varies from year to year, will have this growing behavior. The fleet is this line, so if the line is above the zero, it means that she's increasing in terms of capacity. Only when she goes below zero does it mean that the capacity is actually decreasing. In terms of orders, there are 2 or 3 dimensions that are more privileged, but we can see that we're having an increasing number of orders for ships that are bigger. for example, between 16 to 20,000 TEUs. In terms of geographical location, for us to study the way that the business is related uh, with social aspects, we have here three countries that dominate the building, who are China, South Korea, and Japan. The Philippines produce in a lesser amount and with a market quota that is quite big compared with the others. Finally, the last business, that is the scrapping, that is the shipbreaking market. It's a market where the product valorization is made according to the last measure that we didn't talk about, that is the light dismantlement, which is basically the weight of the metal in the ship. It's a price that is quite volatile, not only the price of the metal, but also the price of the scrapping. It's a business that is done when the ship can no longer do a retrofitting, when it can no longer be adapted to new regulations. The case that was an example for us was of the double bottom was made as retrofitting in some units. Not because it's the best solution, but because it's it was the quicker solution back then to do the retrofitting of the fleet. It corresponded to a very large order in the shipyard, and the shipyards ended up having some capacity to do these alterations in the fleet in good time. The segments that most contribute in the recycling business are especially the solid bulk and the containers, although both segments for different reasons. The solid bulk, because there's a demand that is not equal to the offer. The containers, because there's a depreciation of large units for small dimensions, for a smaller number of units, but of larger dimensions to create scale economies, especially in raw materials. I was asking why there was a smaller offer in bulk. Is it for environmental reasons, insecurity, loss of cargo? This has been accompanied by a decrease of the price of some raw materials that are not food related. These products have not known many changes, but the transportation of ore, for example, has highly decreased. And ore and coal are two very important components of the bulk transport, especially in terms of cargo volume, and this has been growing increasingly. Besides, we're still suffering the effects of the orders that were made at the peak of the economic activity of 2007, the peak of raw material research. The orders cannot be made to have a ship 6 months later. These studies and these ways of managing the fleet have to be seen for a long period of time, have to be studied for a long period of time. And they're limited in terms of space and time. The fleet is usually predicted for a minimum of 6 years. And we are suffering this number of order that was made at the beginning of the century. The peak of orders was in 2006, 2007, and they're now being delivered. And this is what has been creating an excess in the bulk business. And if you notice, the ore has known also a decrease in the international market. It has to do with displacement market. Has it to do with the construction market? Are the countries that built the same as those who displaced, or is there an influence being a market global? And if the great owners try to dismantle them in countries where the requirements are and the costs are less. There's one country only that is a major player in terms of new constructions and in terms of shipbreaking, that is China. In the other cases, we'll talk about recycling in the environmental area. The countries that do shipbreaking have nothing to do with those that do shipbuilding. And the international community started to see the importance of a global revolution on the way the shipbreaking and the recycling is made, because the United Nations sent a mission in 2010, right after many claims and after many images came to social communication on the way how these shipbreakings were made, and the United Nations sent a special mission that visited a series of countries. I believe they didn't go to Pakistan, that is a major player as well in terms of shipbreaking, but they were in China, they were in Bangladesh, they were in Cambodia, they were in China. They were also in other shipbreaking points that are technically more evolved. We have some in the Netherlands, here in Europe, and in Liverpool as well. The American continent also has some, for example, in the United States. All these conditions were verified. A report was made, and in 2011, within the Organization of International Maritime, convention was agreed on the way shipbreaking should be done. Although it only approaches the environmental aspect. And there are other implications in the way of this area of maritime transport relates to the society that currently is less sustainable in terms of activity. On this part, interface aspect, I think that it was quite widely approached during the presentation of Huikunya. He spoke about the several actors, about the way maritime transport relates to the ports, and he also mentioned probably the existence of small ports, medium ports, regional ports, local ports that usually work for specific interland in the port, transshipment ports, as we have now in Portugal, the port of Sines, where the activity of the ship has to do with transporting cargo from one ship to the other, without having the cargo adding value in activities that are verified internally. Finally, just to to verify that this concentration in container maritime transport corresponds to a concentration rate in terms of container operators. There's there are some port operators that have a very important role here in terms of containers movement. In all this list, without analyzing in great detail, I think that half is in China. I'd like to know if the people that are online have fallen asleep or if they're still following us before I move on to the environmental aspect. Are you guys still awake? I'd like to ask a question, please. Well, we already finished the question part. We've been talking here about container ships, and in terms of tons, the diagrams that were here were in terms of tons. In terms of numbers, the ton is increasing, but the number is decreasing, right? The number of ships that are being built, for example. The ships are getting bigger, but the number of ships being ordered compared to those who are being scrapped, the capacity of the fleet is still increasing. Yes. This continuous line that we saw above the zero means that the growth rate has been diminishing, but there's still a growth here. The fleet has been altering in the way that you're seeing. Now that the ships are bigger and bigger and the number is starting to stabilize, to what extent an accident or a contingency that you mentioned could introduce a greater volatility in the index that you mentioned in the BDI? Thank you.
If the risk increases with this new fleet mix regarding the value of the price, most of the container ships, or the ones who make the inter-ocean traffic, only have the constraint of the Suez Canal. Technologically, regarding energy efficiency, they are above the previous construction. We will see this on the environmental part. Mm. Anyway, in terms of market behavior, geopolitical disturbances have not been witnessed here, but we are reducing to a smaller number of ships on a smaller number of ports. There are not so many ports with the capacity of welcoming this type of ships. This can bring some vulnerability that I believe it's largely compensated by the scale economies that these units allow. But for example, in Malacca, piracy, yes, these are areas that can translate huge disturbances in the cost of the freights and in the way that the logistics chain globally is fed. I would like to debate with you the factor of the influence of the flag of the ship, of the registry of the ship. Is this a factor for competitivity, or does this contribute to the shipping factor? Because we have been debating why there are second registry flags and why, for example, Portugal still has the second registry C in Madeira. So the merchant name in Portugal, does it need competitivity because of the registry of the flag, or are there other factors influencing that lack of competitivity, hence the continuous disappearing of ships? We have four or five great flags and four or five great countries that in fact have a very important weight on the fleet globally. Regarding the registry flag, the second registries appear due to costs and also due to regulation. Today, we know that regulation is more difficult now. First, when Europe had the Port State Control Initiative, since that initiative was opened to other areas of the globe, like the United States, Canada, a set of nations have the Port State Control Initiative. There are a set of conventions, not only of the International Maritime Organization, but even for the International Labor Organization, there are fiscalized to port state control. That advantage, or in terms of regulation, is disappearing almost. It still exists, although the advantage regarding costs, in terms of crew costs, because in terms of regulation and of being mandatory or not for the companies to have to be in agreement with international regulation, that advantage has disappeared. I don't know if I was clear or not, if you want to know anything else. Are you guys all asleep? Well, this being said, I need my presentation for environmental sustainability, please. Numbers of the BDI from 12,000 points to 700 points. My question is this sustainable? Let me bring you three hypotheses: yes, no, or I don't know. We don't have a voting system, so I need to bring an oral presentation about the theme. Is this sustainable? From my point of view, it is sustainable. From my point of view, it still is sustainable. Hence, the companies are now subject to dynamics as, for example, fusions and acquisitions, or if they are able to generate richness in other sectors that are upwards or downwards of the maritime transport by itself, on door to door, on the port operational manager, train transport, and in the port operation itself. So to me, it is sustainable. It can be sustainable for some companies, for others it is not. That's why they disappear. But it needs very careful management strategies, a bet on modern perspectives, on other sources of trust. But for this, we need investment and we need capacity and ability. A bet on modern ships, sustainability goes on two axes, space and time. In which axis is that bet on modern ships moving? Present needs and future generation needs. What state of mind, what mindset does this bring us regarding sustainability? All those items that I told you, and this was not naive at all in terms of economic sustainability, were short-term items. Mr. Brundtland in his report, the idea that he's trying to bring to us is to think of sustainability on the long term. Despite bringing this 10 years series, despite these huge differences in the value of rights, we cannot look at this business on a short-term perspective. And to me, as a pilot, I have the commanders of ships who are ship owners themselves and have their own ship on the freight market. And they tell me that, well, today can't do it, cannot cover the running costs. The operation itself is in deficit. But the investment on a ship, it's not an investment for a year, it's an investment for 10, 15 years, the running time of the ship. Sustainability on the economical and other areas that we will see, environmental, social responsibility. The idea of sustainability needs to be understood on the long term. On the short term, we will always have a very narrow vision, very limited vision also on the long term. That's the way to go. Only on the long term we can have a multidisciplinary vision that gathers all areas of sustainability of maritime transport. Where are my slides? Well, we still have half an hour, so I think it's worth it to start with a new theme. Dan Brown is one of my favorite authors, and he has a very peculiar technique. At the end of each chapter, he leaves an appetizer for the next chapter. It's what we will do throughout these last 15 minutes to leave an appetizer for the environmental sustainability and the way that we will see it in the maritime transport, especially the legislation part and regulation part. It was throughout the last 50 years, it was a reaction posture that the society had. This was a perspective of reaction, and now we're taking the first step in the proactive perspective. The main impacts of maritime transport: air pollution, combustion of fuel, and the emission of gas of the fuel that are transported. These are two quite different things. Maritime pollution by hydrocarbons and other substances, disposal of waste, emission of paint toxins, migration of water organisms, shipwrecks, loss of cargo, and something that seems a little naive, but it's now being approached also. It's noises, underwater noises that the ships propagate with their displacement, collision of ships with marine mammals. These are environmental aspects that need to be equated here, not because they are visible at all, but if we were to remember which are the main customers of maritime transport in this activity, on that bigger circle, what did we have there? A characteristic that is selling a lot nowadays, characteristic of a product. In our market of the developed countries, a product needs something what? Needs to be green, right? Green. Green sells. How can we identify if it's green or not? It's white, okay. But how can I identify if it's green or not? I need to trace the history of all the processes from the raw material until the shirt itself, including transport. And if we all search for the regulation regarding social responsibility, we need to monitor all the processes that the product went through until it is finished and it reaches our hands as consumers. All the companies that are certified in social responsibility, they need to monitor all those steps for which the product goes through until it reaches them. Moreover, to monitor and to intervene only to conclude agreements if sometimes they need to certificate other companies, certify for both sides of the supply chain. And that's the pressure that is leading to a thought for details like collision with marine mammals. The main regulation instruments for environment of maritime transport, Marpol. Marpol is the convention that I always say that, like Winston Churchill said, of the British airmen that won the England battle, never so many owed that much to this little. I think that the maritime environment never owed so much to a convention as to Marpol. For the last 30 years, although not within those simple patterns, it has some complexity, of course, but it was able to make it a habit in the maritime transport. Those behaviors of sustainability are now a habit. So Marpol is responsible that me, myself, 30 years ago, I went to the beach and I would find fuel in the sand, and today I simply don't. Other conventions, the anti-fouling, I think in Portuguese it's translated like anti-fueling. BWM, please don't confuse with the brands of cars, BMW, but the nuance is different, but it has a deep significance, which is the management of ballast water, the Convention on Recycling Ships, the Convention on Preparing and Answering to Pollution Incidents, the Convention Intervention, and from London to the deposition of matter in the ocean. Just to finish, all of this begins with the incident of Torrey Canyon in 1967 in the British coast. A series of instruments of the international organization that starts here. The building part, the ship that was made bigger. It had an operation that regarding naval architecture is called jambos. The ship itself, the behavior part of the ship, and the last review has to do with the behavior. The genesis of this accident, the commander, it has a lot of pressure on him to get to the discharge ports. The sooner the better, to take advantage of the tide that would only return in 5 days time. The behavior part, this accident has origins in one of the weaknesses of the human being, vanity. The commander wanted to put the ship in straight line and exchange oil between tanks. That transference of oil was not so innocuous as it is today, so we could leave on the deck some dirt, but we needed to keep the ship clean, right? Behavior part. To reach sooner, he directs the ship, drives the ship to areas where the depth was quite reduced. Today we have traffic corridors. Today it is mandatory to have no-go areas, areas where the ship cannot go at all. The last subject of the behavior part, the, the last order sent to the steering part of the ship to avoid the incident. He answers the guy who's steering. Well, but it was in autopilot, lack of familiarization with the system. So ways of fighting the accident. The accident is in an area outside the territorial area of the United Kingdom, even before the approval of the Convention of the UN regarding maritime law, before speaking about the 200 miles. So the United Kingdom, in order to intervene, would go outside this jurisdiction area afterwards the commission intervention gets here. The lack of preparation, there are no answers, there are no contingency plans. That's what becomes mandatory by the OPRC. The first attempt of containing the spillage is trying to set fire to it. That's the quickest way to try to contain the spillage. A lot of attempts occur in that sense. It was not that volatile oil, and despite being bombarded by the English tornadoes, the fire just doesn't start. So lack of preparation. They use agents to disperse, to keep the spillage. The dispersant agents, what they do is to increase the density of the product. So it doesn't stay on the surface, it sinks. It's still there. So, any questions? Well, there was a lack of preparation because this was the first incident. There are a series of conventions set by this accident. Yes, the MG also is not there. All of them are based on this accident. The Titanic, for example, as Solas, for example, it is agreed after the accident of the Titanic, OPRC, all of them have to do of the Amococavis. Because this happened in the coast of two countries and contingency plans of a transnational perspective needed to happen after the Amococavis, but it is here in the Story Canyon that the international organization got its impulse and its trust, and it is the relevant role that it still has today in regulating not only in law also, but in bringing directives, bringing standards of different scope that not necessary by law. Guys online, I started with sustainability, and the first thing that I told you were needs. I have the need to go to dinner. Well, they are thanking us on the other side. They are all very quiet and they are thanking us. Thank you. The community also thanks everyone, and I'll see you tomorrow.